Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
We're back. It's late.
Yeah, and I'm trying something new here. I'm doing the show standing up.
I thought you were going to say pantless, but I guess you said new.
I don't have to. That's not new.
Yeah. Ever since we ditched the video format, that was work. Yeah. Standing up podcast. So I expect you to be very funny.
Yeah, I'm going to have that stand-up comic energy of a guy who just worked a full day sitting down.
So anybody here from Tacoma?
Hey, you all got girlfriends, huh? Hey, you guys bring your girlfriends to the show? Fuck you. Fuck you, your girlfriends.
Oh, that guy over there is single.
He gets what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's a joke. Copyright me. But yeah, welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. If you haven't heard our show before, every week we tell each other stories. And it was just as we were getting on, I say on air, but it's a recording. I just had the epiphany that, we could have very well talked about this topic today. And
we'll see.
And I never searched it. Usually I search it to make sure.
If we have, I'll pretend that we have it, and then we can compare the two episodes and see which is better.
That's a good call. I was going to say, so if I repeat myself, see you next week. But yeah, there's no rules to it. It can be fiction, nonfiction. It could be about places or people, history, science, even though
smells, flavors.
Science makes it seem like we're smart enough to talk about science, and we usually don't.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think maybe once or twice we've touched on, I do remember talking about the naturalists, the shark people that studied sharks. It's episode 2 or 3. So that's technically science, but it was more, I thought it was cool because they were like consultants for Jaws, and that's my favorite movie.
I had that volcano topic a few weeks ago that dived into some science behind what happened, but it was more about the fucked up shit that happened.
The guy that literally survived being covered in lava.
He was blasted by hot volcanic air and turned his cell into a fucking oven.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to make it sound like. He just had lava run over his body. Obviously, you do not survive that.
He's like the reverse Terminator popping out of the liquid metal.
I am back. Yeah. So yeah, we touch on that stuff, but we tend to stay away from that.
We don't want you to think that we ever are under the delusion that we know what we're talking about. And I'm going to prove that today.
Cool.
Because this was actually a really hard one to put together. But we're going to talk about the Nahanni National Park Reserve.
I like that this was a very hard one to put together, but you weren't sure whether or not you've done it before.
Yeah.
It's this took a lot of work, but I might have done a lot of work.
I know I haven't done it.
Oh.
I sometimes can't remember what you've done.
I can't remember what I've done either.
Yeah.
Good news. I've never heard of this place, so I have not done this.
Well, it's actually it's up in Canada, and yeah, that's right. We're going to talk about Canada's fucked up shit for a change.
Take that, posers.
Yeah. You just America is so dumb and all that's true. Anything you could say about America is true. But we're going to talk about Canada and their fucking weird shit. So the Nahanni River Valley is what forms this park. It's about 12,000 square miles, and we can't really do justice on an audio format, but I'm serious when I say it's one of the most beautiful landscapes ever photographed.
I thought you were going to say you can't convey the space that 10,000 square miles is. I
cannot even comprehend 12,000 square miles.
And I'm just picturing you over there saying, well, I can't get it over the audio, but I'm holding my arms out really wide.
Yeah. And I'm going to keep stretching until I can give it a big hug.
Justice, yeah. So, beautiful land. So it's not
it's I'm not somebody who gets sappy about wildlife photos and shit, but it's impossible to not be mesmerized by this place. there's like Mount Nirvana, which is like, this glorious mountain that's just sort of overshadowing it all. There's hot springs, whitewater rapids, and then there's this amazing waterfall. So, like I said, fucked up Canada shit.
Yeah.
So these falls are a 295-foot drop, which is more than twice the height of Niagara Falls. In the middle of this waterfall is this giant spike of rock that just seems to like cut through the whole thing. It's called Mason's Rock, and there's some awesome photos of that. It's just a really cool place, and like it's because everything is so, engulfed in, human society and stuff and industrialization, that like, when you do see those areas of the planet that are like still pretty remote and untouched, like it's amazing.
And your first thought is, how can I exploit this for my own personal gain?
Yeah. And today's story is about some people who tried to do that. But yeah, like the reason why the Nahanni can kind of be left alone is that, it still doesn't have direct roads into it. The only way into this park is by float plane, like going up the river itself, or an exhausting multi-day trek. So everything stays pretty isolated and pristine. And like any place that's kind of remote and mostly untouched by humans, we don't know a lot about it, so we're pretty good at making a bunch of shit up to fill in the blanks.
Fill the blanks, yeah.
And there is enough fucked up shit that it has happened there that we know about, that we can certify that not only is it beautiful, but it's also a pretty creepy spot. So the earliest people of the area were the Dene, and in their kind of oral history, they talked about this tribe of people called the Naha, who were a mountain-dwelling people who would come down and raid settlements and shit. And then these people were said to have just quickly and mysteriously disappeared. Like, nobody knows what happened to them. But there's so many stories about them that they almost definitely existed. But there's just no, like, actual trace of them outside of what the Dene talked about.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant, like, the Dene were the ones that... But the mountain people were the ones that...
Yeah, the Naha.
That vanished.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
That alone already starts planting some seeds for spooky shit. You mean to tell me there's a tribe of vicious raiders hiding in the mountains? You would also, like, more than one person who's traveled there, like, will talk about how when you're going up the river, so there's spaces in the river where you're, like, in this rocky gorge. It's kind of to be as nerdy as fucking possible about it. Like, in the first Lord of the Rings movie, they're going down that river, and there's like these giant statues and stuff that, like, it just makes them look really tiny in their boats in the middle of this fucking river. It's
right.
Kind of that same feeling, but the way the wind is hitting into this gorge, like, people swear they're hearing like screaming or wailing. The way the sound just reverberates off these rocks. And obviously, early days of this region, people are going to assume it's like mythical creatures and demonic spirits.
It's shit. It's modern day. I would still assume that.
Yeah. And you know what? There are people who still do. But like all cool shit, eventually the white settlers came. And
The end.
And it wasn't that, like, white settlers are above superstitions that maybe started with the Dene. Far from it. We will believe everything you tell us, and then we will add on even more
ridiculous stuff,
like really dumb shit on top of your stories. But with that being said, like, we can believe that a place is completely evil and haunted and fucked up with every fiber of our being. But if there's gold in them scary fucking hills, we're going anyway.
Well, yeah. I mean, look at all the people out west in the Americas that were going into places where they knew there was a good chance that they'd get killed either by, natives that were pissed that you were invading their land and killing them, or just by other gold prospectors, because it's hard to have any real law when you're in the middle of nowhere by yourself. But people would still do it, knowing the danger, because the idea of riches and gold is very tempting.
Yeah. Like, it's, if there's profit to be made, we don't give a fuck.
Plus, it's that thing where we can talk ourselves up and be like, I don't believe in that stuff. I want my gold. Yeah. And then as soon as it gets dark, you're like, I fucked up. I should not have come here.
This was a mistake. This was a mistake. No, please. Let's talk about how the Nahanni Valley came to be known as the Valley of Headless Men. So the thing about this legend,
I was going to say I can take some guesses.
So the thing about this legend is I've heard a lot of people tell the story, trying to prepare for this show and to tell the story to you. And the problem is, and the reason this was kind of a pain in the ass to put together, is that everybody tells the story a little bit differently.
Yeah, which is common with just local lore and myth, because it gets passed down and it goes from family to family, and each family kind of puts their own this twist on it, and and nothing, like, the big outline is mostly the same, but the finer details change just enough that I'm prepared to say on all these stories, who the fuck actually knows at this point? It could all be bullshit, but we'll try. So in 1904. Or 1906, or fucking 1908, because we can't even agree on that. There were three brothers named Willie, Frank, and Charlie McLeod. Well, the problem right off the bat is there's three brothers and three dates. They all use, one used the Julian calendar, but one was going by the Aztec calendar, and one was going by something else. I don't know.
Each one going by their personal birthday. Apparently, to all these stories, they really wanted to either try prospecting in the Nahanni, believing that it was this untapped source that was just and that was kind of how people mined. It was like, hey, is this place mostly untouched? There might be fucking gold in there.
From my understanding to this day, I mean, there's types of geologic formations that you can look for that kind of hint at whether there's gold, but largely it's still kind of that guessing game. You just have to drill and see. Now, once you start hitting different types of rocks, it gives you an indication of what's there. Yeah. But you're 100% right. Back then, has anybody checked here? No. Well, let's go check there.
And back then, it was even worse, because it was we're just fucking putting pans into the river and hoping we pick some gold out. Others say that they weren't trying to do it specifically in the Nahanni, and that they were trying to cut through the Nahanni to get to a more proven mining ground, or what they suspected would be a more proven mining ground.
Gold Valley.
Yeah. But when you consider...
There might be gold there.
But when you consider just how remote the Nahanni Valley is, trying to cut through there seems really stupid to me. So I hope they went there with the intention of working that land.
Although sometimes it's maybe that's not your destination, but cut through might be the wrong word, because I'll do that for things where it's well, I'm going to take this route not because it's a shortcut, but because I also want to maybe try to hit this and this and this on the way. So maybe that was they were going to check while they're going through it, but they weren't. That wasn't maybe their ultimate destination.
Yeah. So, but the version of the story I heard involved the brothers camped in this valley and figuring that it was a good ground to try their luck. And the legend is that they actually found gold, pretty quick. And not just a few flakes, but a potential, this is an operation vein level of fucking gold they were finding. they found way more than they were actually prepared to bring back with them because they were just kind of scouting. So they filled up on what they could and proceeded to head back to it's called Fort Liard, which is where they came from. And they were going to sell off what they had and then prepare for like a big return trip to like really kind of start their operation. So they got back in their boat, but the intense rapids of the Nahanni River had other plans for them. Eventually their boat flooded and sank, and they lost pretty much all their equipment and all their gold with it. So these brothers were, you think the story would get bad right from there, but these brothers were actually pretty experienced, and they would make it back to Fort Liard after fashioning a makeshift boat out of the shit that the valley had to offer. Which, you know, to gloss over it makes it sound easy, but the truth is, like, even if you know what you're doing now, pulling off some shit like that when you're lost in the woods is really fucking tough.
Well, yeah, except for that's the one area of the world that's really known for its canoe trees. You know, they grow like fruit. So if it was in season, they probably had a boat ready for them. I think that's how it works.
But considering, you know, they had boats and they fucking flooded, you know, to handle the rapids with, you know, what the woods give you at the time is pretty impressive. And it seemed like Charlie knew that, you know, they were kind of testing their luck with this place. So when they got back to the fort, they took some time out. And then when Willie and Frank were ready to go back, because they were like, hey, there's a ton of fucking gold still out there, Charlie told them that he was out. He thought they got pretty fucking lucky, and he didn't want to mess with that valley anymore.
So what really happened is Charlie, he's the one that made it out of the boat with his pocket stuffed with gold. He just never told his brother. I'm actually rich. You fools can go. So Willie and Frank brought a third man with them. The identity of this guy is kind of up for debate. But most assumed he was a friend of the brothers, and off they went. And a month went by, and a few months went by, and Charlie was never really alarmed during this time, going by without any word from his brothers, because it's 1900s wilderness mining. He figured they must have struck it rich, and they were hard at work. Right. Certainly a few more months, he figured they would stroll into the fort with more gold than a man could ever know what to do with. And eventually 2 years went by. And now Charlie knew he had to go out and find him. Or try to. So he led an expedition up the river, and eventually Charlie and his search party found what looked like a camp through some spruce trees on the side of the river. A message was written out on a broken dog sled runner, or a tree, depending on who's telling the story, and it just said, "We have found a fine prospect." Why would you write that on a tree or a dog sled runner?
Well, it's usually some shit somebody writes down before Cthulhu shows up. So yeah, I wouldn't write it at all, honestly. Upon approaching the camp, they found the two bodies of Charlie's brothers. So there's one version of the story that they were like outside, like, and their bodies were tied up. But the more common one I heard was one was like crawling towards looked like he had been crawling towards a rifle leaning up against a tree, and the other seemed to be trying to crawl out of his tent. But the only common denominator in all these stories is that the brothers had their heads cut off.
Yeah, that's usually not survivable.
Yeah.
Especially out in the middle of the woods. But is it... From the pictures I looked up, it looks like, you know, I know Canada in the winters it gets cold, but it looks like it still gets summers there, right? Like, maybe not as warm as we get down here, but
yeah,
it's not really... Because I'm always skeptical on these. The brothers have been missing 2 years before you go looking, and then you find the bodies in a condition that you can even, like, suppose what they were doing at the time that they were murdered. It's like, by now they'd be so scavenged by animals and stuff that... unless you just happen to, it's like they've been gone 2 years and you happen to find them like 3 days after they were murdered. It's like, oh shit, I should have left last week, but the big game was on. I stayed home for
it. I mean, keep them in mind at that point. They're probably identifying them by just scraps of shit that Charlie probably recognized around the camp. I mean, it's 2 bodies with their heads cut off. Yeah, I'm sure he wasn't immediately like, oh, I recognize that neck cavity anywhere.
Well, but I mean, like, even the fact that he was crawling towards a rifle. It's like, he was like a heap of bones by a rifle. But
well, I mean, what do you think he was doing? Yeah.
Jacking off. He's in the woods,
tossing himself off to a rifle. I told you this is Canada, not America. They don't jack off to the things we jack off to. Now, one version says that the third man that went with the brothers was later found by mounted police in Vancouver sometime later, and that he had $8,000 in gold nuggets on him. So naturally, one theory is that
suspicious.
This dude brutally killed the brothers and took the gold they found for himself. But it's also said that after they found these 2 brothers, they found his body, again, headless, just up the river from the camp. So investigators, you quote investigators, because we're going to talk a lot about these people, would show up to these camps, and they said that the 2 weren't actually decapitated when they were killed, and that animals probably showed up and just took their heads.
Oh, yeah, see, there we go.
Which I'm kind of like, probably not.
No, yeah. That's what I was waiting to see what you followed up with.
Why wouldn't you take anything else,
Well, it's weird that I'm going to know this, but I think you probably do too, and I think anybody that listens to our show probably does too. It's not unusual for bodies to get scavenged by animals, but they tend to take the fleshy parts or the soft parts or the easy parts. It's not easy to... There's no animal out there that would chew off somebody's head and walk off with it, because this
is the prime part of the body I want, and leave the rest of the shit there.
And it does happen where if the body gets completely mangled or mauled or something, maybe they'd walk off with the head, but the rest of the body would also be in various pieces, probably mostly missing. Like, you wouldn't find... So, yeah, I don't believe the animal theory one.
Yeah, I think it's kind of stupid. Whether you believe that third guy died up there with the brothers or not, don't worry. A place doesn't start getting called the Valley of Headless Men just because it happened once. Swiss prospector Martin Jorgensen went there, and his body was found in 1917 next to his burned cabin. He was decapitated. And it jumps a lot. That's how it becomes a legend, and less likely a serial killer.
Right.
In 1945, the unnamed body of a miner from Ontario was found in his sleeping bag, decapitated. And there were just random reports like that. If people would get set up in this valley, their shit would burn down, and they would find a body with its head cut off.
Yeah, you're really ruining this for me, because when you describe this unimaginable beauty, untouched wilderness, but it's got this kind of creepy vibe and this canyon that makes noises, I'm like, I would love to travel that. I don't really want to be decapitated, though. So, that's the negative.
Don't be a coward, Steve.
Well,
getting decapitated.
I guess in fairness, right now
science.
I guess in fairness, there's 3 or 4 big positives and just 1 negative. So
yeah. There's also some kind of eerie non-decapitated deaths that occurred in this valley. There was a trapper named John O'Brien who was found frozen next to his campfire, and when people found him, he had matches in his hand, and his expression was just eerily calm. He didn't look like a guy fighting for warmth or struggling for fire. He looked completely calm, and witnesses to the scene described it as if he had just been flash frozen, Bill Eppier and his partner Joe Mulholland disappeared on the river. And and a partner of theirs spent years trying to find them and only have ever found their burned down cabin. Later on in 1962, there was a pilot who crashed into the valley, and he actually had as far as crashing into a fucking wilderness, he had a pretty good survival setup. The plane had plenty of food, fuel, and the makings for shelter. And he kept a diary as he just sort of waited for rescue, but like none of the searching aircrafts ever found him because it's that much of a dense wilderness. He waited, according to his diaries, he waited for 50 days, and then the diary entries abruptly stopped. 6 months later, they found his camp, but they didn't find any trace of him. So, you know, all likelihood, he probably said, fuck this, I'm going to wander off and try to get help.
You're right. After 50 days, you're like, these assholes aren't even looking for me. I'm going on my own.
I mean, if it's me, you get like 2 days. And then I start panicking, and I just hear like Les Stroud in my head just being like, you know, if you sit, you die. It's like, and I have no idea where I'm going. But, and then there was a woman named Anne Lefter who wandered away from a hunting party in 1926 and disappeared. Months later, a man was camping in the area, and in the middle of the night, he heard something outside of his tent, like something moving around, like someone was like pushing rocks over or something. And he got out to see what the sound was, and he saw a naked woman frantically climbing a hill. The man was terrified because he's a bitch.
Oh, God, a naked woman.
Yeah, and he froze up. And he explained that there was something about the way she moved that seemed almost demonic to him, and he refused to follow her or see what was wrong. So that's on him, as far as I'm concerned.
No, that's smart. I mean...
Nope, you follow the devil woman, which is the name of my book. So these are just some of the weird things that have happened in this valley. Maybe it's prospectors fighting, maybe it's ghosts, maybe it's just aggressive wildlife. But it definitely leaves an impression. Like even the people who are the first to sing this park's praises of this park's beauty are the ones to tell you that there's also kind of a sinister tone to it all. Like there's this feeling that this place is just beyond human understanding when you're there, and way beyond anything we could attempt to control.
So why is it that I hear about places like this and I think, I want to try to control that? Like, not control it. That sounds like take it. It's like, I want to go camping and see it, and I'm the worst possible candidate. I don't think I could survive a night camping in my backyard. Yeah. But you hear this stuff, you're like, yeah, I could try to tackle that.
I think for me, it's just like, you know, of all the boring ways I think I'm going to actually die, I look at that as like, that would actually be all right. You know?
It's notable. Yeah.
To finish it off, there is a theory to the early 1900s murders. And I don't know how credible it is, but it can all be traced back to one fucking nut. A guy named Albert Johnson, who they called the Mad Trapper of Rat River.
Well, that's a pretty cool name, though.
Pretty cool. It gets cooler. Join me. About 40 miles away from the Nahanni River, a 35-year-old stocky, muscular guy just sort of showed up. It was trapping season in this area. It was early December of 1931, and the neighbors of this man started to complain that someone was disrupting their traps. This man, Albert Johnson, was the only change to the scene. So the neighbors complained, and they called in Constable Alfred Buns King and Special Constable Joe Bernard. So they went and paid Johnson a visit to investigate these incidences. They approached the cabin, which was billowing with smoke, and they tried everything to strike up a conversation, but Albert would not come out and talk to them. And it was 40 below zero weather, so the men were like, fuck this. And we're like, we'll come back with backup and make this piece of shit talk. So with 2 more Mounties and a civilian, for a little slightly bigger crowd.
I like in the civilian thing, he was just some dude that's like, oh, I went in on this shit.
The one guy in the early 1900s who really wanted a badge but couldn't get one. They knocked on the door and immediately a shot burst through it, wounding King. The men had to retreat and they rushed King back to town. It was only a straight 20-hour dog sled trip from this cabin back to this town that ended up saving his life.
Hopefully, please tell me he wasn't shot in his buns.
Yeah, that's why he's buns now.
Yeah,
it's ironical. His buns were shot off.
He doesn't have them. They got blown off. Yeah.
In January 4th, 1932, 9 men, 42 dogs, and 40 pounds of dynamite were brought to bring Albert in. Bear in mind, at this point, Albert has not said a fucking word to anyone during this shit. It's crazy how this just, went from, we think he's disabling traps, to, we're at war.
I like the dynamite, because it's like, our goal is to bring this guy in. It's like, what's the dynamite for? Blow shit up.
Dead or alive. The posse had to thaw the dynamite out with their body heat. But once they did, they heaved sticks through the cabin and blew Albert Johnson's cabin to shit.
Can you imagine this guy that, like you said, at this point, all he's done, he shot somebody, but they kicked his door in.
But they brought a posse to get him. At that point, it's self-defense.
It's self-defense, right. And now you're looking out and you're like, these guys are like humping dynamite. Yeah. Oh, fuck, now they're throwing...
Let me be clear here. I am not convinced one way or the other that Albert Johnson was actually guilty of anything except being completely crazy and someone you shouldn't have fucked with. There's not evidence for anything else at this point. So they blew up Albert Johnson's cabin, and there's actually photos of his totaled cabin. And when they went to check for his remains, the most action movie shit happened. Johnson popped out of a foxhole he had dug, dual wielding 2 guns, and starts shooting at the officers, forcing them to retreat.
Again, justified. They just fucking grenaded you with... Yeah.
If nothing else, we have John Rambo shit happening here. Who's right, who's wrong, I don't know. Everybody probably took it too far. When a 3rd patrol was dispatched, this time Johnson had fled. For 2 weeks in 50 below zero weather and 2 massive blizzards, Johnson evaded this posse.
Which seems rather... How do I put that? It seems very easy to evade the posse in that weather. It seems very difficult to live.
Right.
But if you can survive, nobody's finding you because everybody's just trying to live.
Yeah, and there's a lot of factors. Like you say, it's hard to live, but when you're wanted, it's a lot harder. On January 30th, he was confronted by the party once again. He would shoot Constable Spike Millen through the heart. He was trapped in a long standoff, and his direct routes were blocked off by more Mounties. Because the longer he ran, the more people were like, we got to get this fucking guy.
I know. I was just about to say, I'm picturing they're all trying to catch this one guy. The rest of Canada is open for business if you're a criminal.
Yeah. It's a fucking one man versus the entire Canadian army. To escape this, and this is fucking nuts if you can picture it, especially if you look at some of the fucking cliffs and mountains of this area, some photos of it, and imagine it in a below 50 blizzard. Johnson climbed a 7,000-foot sheer mountain cliff without climbing gear in the middle of the night during a blizzard. It should have been impossible, and during all of this, Johnson hadn't been able to adequately hunt because he couldn't fire his rifle because it would give away his positions. And he, like, really gets supplies because it's fucking frozen. But he fucking climbed this goddamn mountain cliff. So Johnson...
So what you're saying is Johnson is one of the survivors of the mysteriously vanished mountain tribe. They're like supernatural.
I'm saying this guy was a fucking trapper version of John Wick.
Yeah.
And, like, unkillable until they kill him. Which we're getting to. But he fucking did this cliff scaling, and then he evaded his pursuers for another few weeks until eventually they caught up with him in February of 1932 at Eagle River, and he was finally brought down in that gun battle. But nobody claimed his body, no family, no friends. Nobody had any clue who the fuck this guy was.
Or what they charged him with. They're like, all right, we got him shot. What were we coming out here for? Oh, yeah, some traps? Fuck. Like you said, they're probably like, we went a little overboard.
What are you guilty of? Being the biggest fucking action hero in the early 1900s. So some say that he was just a, like, trapper who decided to go Rambo on some Mounties. But others say that before he got there, he was actually picking people off in the Nahanni Valley, which he was certainly violent enough to do it. But, you know, there's nothing to back that up. It's just, hey, this guy seemed dangerous. That's a dangerous area that was kind of nearby. But it's a great story, so it has to be told.
When we see that a lot, too, we're like, well, this is convenient, so let's just go with it. Our work here is done, boys.
Right.
Of course, that doesn't explain all the beheadings that continued for decades afterwards, but
it's, you know, it's haunted. That's the explanation. So yeah, that's kind of the crux of it. You know, like I said, I really think, you know, look this valley up, like, just, if nothing else, to just see it, like, because I guarantee you, just telling these stories doesn't do justice to, like, what a fucking awesome setting for any story, you know?
Like I said, I'm only kind of half joking. You talk about these places, and it's like, fuck, as soon as that border opens back up post-COVID, I know where I'm going camping.
Yeah.
I would not survive. I wouldn't be back, but so that'll mark the end of our podcast. But
yeah, but if it's camping and you know you're going to survive, that shit ain't camping. Nobody.
And like you said, if you're going to die somewhere, at least die somewhere, like, amazing and spectacular.
Yeah.
Like, and I would die of the dumbest fucking thing, too. It wouldn't be like, oh, man, a bear ate him, but he fended him off for 5 hours before he succumbed to to his adversary. It'd be like, yeah, he tripped on a tree root, like, at the trailhead and hit his head on the visitor sign.
I know I would, like, probably, like, just start taking a crap, like, right where a bear was sleeping, not realizing it's a bear under me.
Like, man, this rock is nice and warm and fuzzy. A perfect place to shit.
Yeah. And of course, you get mauled with your pants down, so what they do find that's left of you is shameful.
Yeah, well, the story would be like, man, the investigator would be like, another one of these hikers trying to fuck a bear.
When will they learn? Ate his butt off.
Ben Buns Matlock.
Ben Deep Buns Matlock. So yeah, that's the story.
Yeah, it's amazing how you can find all these, like, even some of the, like, least explored or least inhabited places on Earth have all this lore behind them.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, it's not unusual because the less it's human nature, the less we know about something, the more we, like you said, you try to fill in the gaps. And that's
the fun part. Once you know what everything is, like, I don't want to know what killed those guys. Not really, because I know it was probably just some shithead.
I'm picturing that nobody murdered them. It was they found this mother-loaded gold and their heads literally exploded, like in cartoons where they're like, holy shit.
Their eyes pop out like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, like, wooga.
Exactly. Or maybe they saw that naked lady running through and they were just like...
Humming.
Humming pop and their head just explodes.
Or
maybe it was that guy from Upright Citizens Brigade. You know, he's just there's a hermit in the woods that's walking around. I'm squishing your head. I'm squishing your head.
And then it worked.
Yeah. Hey, hell, fuck. Look into that. I think he was Canadian.
Yeah.
I think all of them were, weren't they?
Yeah. I have it on good authority that Canadians will destroy your head.
So anyway, no, that's. I like I said, I really like stories of those places. Hey, it's interesting because you get to hear like different parts of the earth that you may not have known about, and then you get to hear these weird stories behind them.
Yep.
And like I said, a lot of this was positive stuff. The, being murdered or even just being randomly like invaded by a posse of mounted police.
I really like that image of him like shoving like rubble out of a foxhole and like
I'm picturing
drawing out because in my mind he's drawing like 2 muskets, so it's like, oh, he rained bullets, but it's literally 2 shots and 40 dogs and fucking 9 men all leave because they're like, he's armed to the teeth.
I like to picture after this months long or even years long, I forget like how long from the very first time the 2 guys went out and gave up and then they finally like killed him. Like after all of this is done, the 2 original guys, all haggard and frostbitten and wounded because the one got shot, go back to the like original person that was people making the complaints. They're like, yeah, we finally got him. And they're like, good, eh? Our traps have been sitting out there for like a week and we didn't even catch a rabbit. And you're like, wait, what do you mean? And it's
I forgot to set the trap correctly. Butterfingers.
Yeah, that one's on me.
Yeah, turns out he didn't do it. We just were bad at this. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they killed the fucking dude and it was like Halloween, where like his body's gone as soon as they turn away. Like he's probably still there. Let's be real. That dude didn't die from dynamite.
I'm disappointed that they caught up with him and they supposedly killed him. It's like that guy needed to just like. That would have made the story 100 times better. It's like he scales this cliff, they track him for another 3 months, but they never find another sign of him again. But people's traps keep getting disrupted.
Nobody can catch shit.
I hope. Like I did like the mental image of them being like, my bad, he didn't actually do anything to our trap. But if they're just saying that he disrupted their traps, I hope he like just took a dump on their trap. Like it was just a prank and it led to this all-out 1 versus a Canadian army battle. But
I'd like it better if they got drunk and took a crap on their own traps and then like thought someone, hey, some asshole did this.
It's got to be the new guy. I do like on these stories too. I meant to say it back when you were first like introducing this whole situation where like one day this guy just shows up. It's like, well, yeah, that's how it works, because if you go from one place to the other, one day you're just there. But everybody likes to say it like it's mysterious. And it's like people come to places all the time. Like, it's not weird.
I mean, who knows? I don't know much about the trapping game, but it's probably like any other community where it's like, who the fuck's the new guy? And, so it's easy to say he just showed up, but probably meant like he just showed up and got in on their shit.
Which is perfectly fair and valid for him to do, but the community takes that like this outsider just started doing what we're doing. It's like, yeah,
fuck.
That's weird, right?
It is weird. I hate fucking people doing shit. Stay put. But yeah, verdict is standing is really tough to do this show. My feet are tired. I'm gonna
that
go
was
get
a
food.
bad choice, but yeah,
I kind of liked it though. It got my energy up.
Yep.
So yeah, we're done. I'm fucking done. You bastards made my feet hurt. I'm going home. See you next week.
Smooth.